What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And gather around, kids, because today we're going to be talking about One Piece. Although this is a unique One Piece video, I certainly haven't seen anybody make a video about this topic before, but we're going to be talking about One Piece and plot-driven narratives versus character-driven narratives. Yay! Alright, so first of all, I know I'm supposed to be doing my Breaking Bad review, and I think that might still be out today. I can't promise that, but I think I might record that video right after this one. So, apparently some people in the YouTube anime community are not happy with me. When is that not ever the case? But apparently they think I give more credence to characters over plot. And just to give you some context and some background for this video, a couple of days ago, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, J-Man from Jay's Playground made a video about Hunter x Hunter and One Piece. And apparently in the discussion section of that video, my name got brought up. Wow. Uh-oh. All right, so here's what happened. The Glory Cross, I think that's his name, yeah, Glory Cross, and some dude named Hisoka Bunji, Zoro for the Win 9, and Alpha Too Late, they got into a discussion. And apparently it was a discussion about plot-driven versus character-driven narratives. And at one point, they were having a discussion, and the Glory Cross, well, first of all, so you know what kind of lines are being drawn here. Zoro for the Win, obviously One Piece fanboy. Alpha Too Late, obviously a One Piece fanboy. Although I'm not sure about Hisoka Bunji because I don't really know him like that. But apparently it was those three against Glory Cross. And so they were having a discussion, and Glory Cross decided to disagree with him. And they called him a Uber Hikari fanboy. Just out of the blue. You're a Uber Hikari fanboy. Now, just to go on a very quick tangent here. Personally, I don't give a shit when people mention my name or talk shit about me or insult me. I really don't care because my life doesn't revolve around what people on YouTube think about me. It just doesn't. In fact, I had someone message me just today and they said, "I really hate you." And I responded back, I said, well, take a number and get in fucking line because you're not the first and you certainly won't be the last. So I don't really care if people insult me over YouTube or whatever the case may be. But in any event, to get back to the main story at hand, so the Glory Cross was called an Uber Hikari fanboy. And he was rightly confused about this. He was like, okay, so what the hell is an Uber Hikari fanboy, and what does Uber Hikari have to do with this discussion? And so the reasoning of Hisoka Bunji, Alpha Too Late, and Zoro for the Win 9 were basically you value characterization over plot, just like Uber Hikari does, and you claim that Oda's a mediocre writer, and you sound like Uber Hikari, therefore you're an Uber Hikari fanboy. Yeah. Then they proceeded to argue that you can't judge One Piece based on the characters because it's not a character-driven narrative, it's a plot-driven narrative. Okay. So then the Glory Cross says, well, I disagree. I don't think it's a plot-driven narrative. And yeah, I watch Uber Hikari's videos. Sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I disagree with him, but I wouldn't consider myself to be an Uber Hikari fanboy. So then the Glory Cross proceeds to question them about why they think One Piece is a plot-driven narrative as opposed to a character-driven narrative. And so they started to say a bunch of dumb shit, obviously. I mean, because, you know, this is what One Piece tards do. They say, well, the overriding theme of One Piece is about freedom. The fuck? Seriously? I mean, you could walk into any bookstore in America and pick out any book at random, whether fiction or nonfiction, and I will guarantee you that in one way or another, the theme of freedom will be brought up. So then the Glory Cross, he says, pretty much the same thing. He was like, yeah, I'm not really buying that. That's way too vague. So then they responded, well, one of the other overriding themes of One Piece is about perseverance. This is the kind of arguments that these people come up with. So yeah, can anybody name me right now a shonen battle manga that's not about perseverance? Yeah, I'll wait. I'll wait. Yeah, my point exactly. So it's obvious that these people don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about. They're just spouting nonsense. They don't understand what a plot-driven narrative is. They don't understand what a character-driven narrative is. So I'm going to explain it to you. Because I'm the nerd nigga. And all I do is give analysis. So here's what had these guys, here's what got their panties twisted up in a bunch. A couple of months ago, maybe it's been a minute now, maybe about 6 or 7 months ago, I had a video out called One Piece and Characterization. A lot of you have probably seen that video. And the problem started with this, when I called Oda a mediocre writer. And everybody, oh my gosh, they were so mad. And Alpha Too Late in particular went on and on and on about how I value characters over plot and I give too much importance to characters as opposed to plot. But here's something that's just so easy to understand. The video was about One Piece and characterization. What the hell were you expecting me to talk about? Were you not expecting me to talk about characterization? I mean, if you're not illiterate, you would expect me to talk about precisely what the title of the video implies, which is One Piece and characterization. The video wasn't my problems with One Piece. It wasn't the story of One Piece or the plot of One Piece. It was called One Piece and characterization. And not only that, my biggest problem with One Piece wasn't even the characterization. That wasn't the biggest problem I had. In fact, if you go to the video right now, I'll have it annotated somewhere in this video. Go to 9 minutes of that video. In between 9 minutes and 10 minutes and 41 seconds, was Uber Hikari praising Oda? Well, I think he was, actually. Yes. Yes, I was. And here's an example. And one of the things that I praised him for was about the interesting points that he brought up about power, justice, and authority. And I said in my One Piece and characterization video, the most interesting aspect of the One Piece story is not really the characters. It's the world building. That's a part of it. But the most interesting part of the One Piece manga is the governing bodies that make up the political factions of the One Piece world, and how they confront each other, and how there's a continual struggle and battle over multiple conceptions of justice. That was always the most interesting part of One Piece to me. It was true 6 or 7 months ago, and it still remains true now. So what do we have here? We have a classic example of people who hear only what they want to hear. People place a label on you, put you in a box. Oh, you're a One Piece hater. Oh, you say Oda's a mediocre writer. So that's precisely what we have here. So, and on top of that, the One Piece, the manga, is not even plot driven. For the most part, it's character driven. Why? Because it's about the multiple incarnations of justice embodied by the governing factions of that world. And that's what produces most of the conflict in One Piece. The interaction of the characters is what produces the conflict in One Piece. And not only that, One Piece is about the adventures of the Straw Hats. That's what we do. We follow the Straw Hats around. That's pretty much the only people that we follow around for the most part. So how could a manga that focuses mainly on the adventures of one group of people be considered a plot-driven manga? I mean, in what universe would that be true? And the irony about this whole situation is that when is that these people claim that One Piece was about freedom or it was about perseverance. And these are the people who are so-called fans. And yet me, a person who's not even really a fan of One Piece, although I do enjoy it, a person who doesn't even read it on a regular basis, the last chapter I read of One Piece was maybe 2.5 years ago. I understand the manga that they claim to be fans of more than they do. Now, how ironic is that? How ironic is that? I mean, these people don't understand what a character-driven narrative is, or a plot-driven narrative for that matter. They don't even understand the difference between story and plot. Seriously. So now I'm going to explain to you precisely what a character-driven narrative is, what a plot-driven narrative is, and why One Piece is not a plot-driven narrative. So first I have to talk about the difference between story and plot. Story, very simply, is a recounting of a sequence of events, generally in chronological order. This is a story. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen. The queen had an illness. She died. The king was so distraught that later on he died of grief. That's a story. Point blank. That's a story. And it almost doesn't have a plot to it. I mean, it's an interesting case because in this situation, the story is so bare bones that it barely has a plot at all. Queen gets sick, dies. King is distraught, he dies of grief. The plot and the story is almost synonymous in that situation. A plot, however, is how a sequence of events relate to each other. A plot is about how to structure or select a sequence of events to produce a certain narrative effect. That's what a plot is. A story is simply a recounting of a sequence of events, generally in chronological order. A plot is about how you structure those sequence of events and about how those sequence of events relate to each other in order to produce significance and meaning. That's what a plot is. Now, what about shonen manga? And especially the battle manga, since that's really the most popular genre of shonen manga is the battle manga. Is the shonen battle manga generally plot driven? No. Why? Because they said they all follow the same fucking plot. Nobody in their right mind would claim that a shonen battle manga is plot driven. They all follow the same plot. You get introduced to a main protagonist. The protagonist gets into a conflict with an antagonist. They fight. The protagonist wins. And you move on. And you repeat that cycle over and over and over again. It's a very, very formulaic plot. No shonen battle manga is plot driven in that sense. They're all formulaic. They all follow the same A, B, C, D setup and format. They're not plot-driven at all. In plot-driven narratives, the structure of the plot is integral to the telling of the story. And I know some people are like, well, when is that not ever the case? That just seems to be trivially self-evident. I'll give you an example. Take Naoki Urasawa, for example. Naoki Urasawa is the mangaka of both Monster and 20th Century Boys. And he's been praised by literary figures all over the world. And he's particularly known as a master of the jigsaw puzzle piece plot. What is that? The jigsaw plot or jigsaw puzzle piece plot involves a gradual revelation of clues. What happens is that sometimes you'll get a clue here, you get a clue there, maybe you get a clue later on, but it's a jigsaw puzzle. You're not sure how the clues relate to each other until you get the broader context, which generally happens towards the end of the story. The plot in a jigsaw puzzle plot is generally non-linear. In other words, the sequence of events happens out of chronological order. The story is almost never told from start to finish. You generally jump around from one year to the next, or way at the end of the story, then you go back to the beginning, then you go somewhere in the middle. That's what a jigsaw puzzle plot piece is. And Naoki Urasawa is a master of this, particularly in 20th Century Boys. If any of you have ever read 20th Century Boys, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The jigsaw puzzle plot also involves multiple perspectives. So sometimes we'll follow around one character, we'll get some clues, then we'll follow around another character, then we'll get some clues, then we'll follow around another character, we'll get some clues, and all of this in a non-linear, non-chronological plot. And all the while, you're not sure how these pieces of the story fit together. That's why it's a jigsaw puzzle plot. Now, that's an instance where you can say that's a plot-driven narrative, because the actual structure of the plot itself is integral to how the story gets told, and it's integral to how you perceive the story. It's integral to how you see the meaning and significance of the story. That's a plot-driven narrative. 20th Century Boys is a plot-driven narrative. Monster is a plot-driven narrative. A shonen battle manga is not a plot, doesn't have plot-driven narrative. Why? Because the plot is almost always the same. Very formulaic. And this is particularly true in the case of One Piece. What is One Piece? What does One Piece have? We follow around the Straw Hats. They go to an island. They meet some bad people. They beat them up. They become saviors. They move on to the next island. They meet some bad guys. They beat them up. They're held as saviors. That's the plot of One Piece. How anybody in their right mind could claim that that means that One Piece is a plot-driven narrative is just beyond me. It's not. It's the same thing. It's rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And that's the character. And so the characteristics of a plot-driven narrative is that the events of the story are not controlled or produced by the characters. That's another characteristic of a plot-driven narrative. In other words, the characters are secondary because they are not proactive. They are reactive. They're swept up in a series of events that they have no control over, or that they have very, very minimal control over. And or they're swept up in events that they themselves did not produce. That's what it means to have a plot-driven narrative. In the plot-driven narrative, the characters take a back seat. But One Piece is exactly the opposite of that. Why? Because One Piece is about the different political factions that are all vying for control and power over the world. The events in the One Piece manga are produced by certain character interactions, by certain confrontations between characters who have different conceptions of justice. That's what produces most of the conflict in One Piece. The conflict isn't produced by a plot in which the characters don't have any control over what's happening to them. In fact, Luffy is a protagonist who's constantly fighting against that control. Duh. So a plot-driven narrative generally consists of either one of two things, sometimes both. One, the structure of the plot is directly integral to how the story gets told. Or two, the characters are secondary. They tend to be reactive rather than proactive. In that sense, One Piece is a character-driven narrative. In that sense, most shonen battle manga are character-driven narratives. That's why Naruto is about Naruto. Duh. I mean, do you get it now? Do you get it? And sometimes it will be the case that an entire genre can lean towards either a plot-driven narrative or a character-driven narrative. And this is especially true in a subgenre of... Is it a subgenre? Yeah, it's probably a subgenre. In the subgenre of science fiction known as space opera. Space opera is a subgenre of science fiction that almost always leans towards plot-driven narratives rather than character-driven narratives. Why? Because space opera tends to be about larger-than-life, grand-scale, large-scale adventures, conflicts, and battles. And it tends to be a situation in which the setting is encompassed by multiple worlds. I'm reading a book right now. Well, not a book, rather. It's a duology by Peter F. Hamilton. The first book of which is Pandora Star. The second book is Judas Unchained. And it is not a character-driven narrative at all. It's space opera. It's set on multiple worlds. It has a huge cast of characters. The book is about 750 pages long. The second book is 800 plus pages long. And it's about a large-scale intergalactic war. It's about the characters being secondary. Why? Because space opera is about space adventure. It's not about characters. In fact, the characters tend to be formulaic. They tend to be archetypes. They tend to be one-dimensional. They tend to be extremely melodramatic. So space opera as an entire subgenre, and I'm not saying it can't be character-driven, but it's almost always leans towards plot-driven narratives. An anime that I love, that's my favorite anime, Space Runaway Ideon, again, is space opera. It's one of my favorite narratives. It's one of my favorite anime. One of the best anime, I think, of all times. And it doesn't have complex characters. Why? Because the emphasis isn't on characterization. In fact, the entire story of Space Runaway Ideon is about an intergalactic war started by a cultural misunderstanding. It's a perfect example of a plot-driven narrative. Because the characters are swept up in events that they do not directly control. An intergalactic war started by accident, basically. That's what Space Runaway Ideon is about. So the reason why I give an analysis of shonen manga that almost always tends to focus on character is not because I value character over plot. It's because almost all shonen battle manga are character-driven, not plot-driven. That's why. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of a shonen manga or even a shonen battle manga that's plot-driven. They all follow the same formulaic plot. Introduced to a main protagonist, we find out who the antagonist is. The protagonist fights them. The protagonist wins. We move on, and that plot device is produced arc after arc after arc. It's almost always that way. In Yu Yu Hakusho, first Yusuke had to fight Rando. Then he had to fight the Saint Beast. Then he had to fight Zagoro. Then he had to fight Sensui. You want to talk about what's another one? Oh, Dragon Ball Z, quintessential battle manga. First, we have to fight Raditz. Then he has to fight Nappa. Then he has to fight Vegeta. Then he has to fight Frieza. Then he has to fight Cell. Then he has to fight Majin Buu. Why? That's the formula of a shonen battle manga. Very formulaic plot. And one of the most important things that you should take away from this video is not just that shonen battle manga is character-driven as opposed to plot-driven, is that almost all stories that you run across will have some combination of the two. Sometimes you can point to aspects of a story that are plot-driven and not necessarily character-driven, or vice versa. Or sometimes a story will, for the most part, be character-driven, except for maybe this one aspect of the story. Sometimes it works out that way. But for the most part, in almost all shonen battle manga, the plot is very formulaic. And almost no shonen battle manga, I won't say any because I don't know of all shonen battle manga, but for the most part, all the ones I know follow a very formulaic plot and are almost never plot-driven. Almost never plot-driven. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, Just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.